Hi, my name is Gord Tessmann. Today we're going to be building a shock from the new D815 Tessmann edition kit. There's a couple new features on this shock that make it super nice to run on the car and super smooth. And we're going to take you through the process we do to build our shocks. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to polish our shock shafts. They have a bit of a coating on them to keep them from rusting, keep them clean during shipping and processing. So I'm going to tighten up the shock a little bit on the end. Take some blue paper towel and my number 6 polishing compound. I'm going to get the shaft a little bit warm. As I do, you can see it kind of melts on there. This gives the shock an ultra smooth movement, and it's definitely worth doing. As you can see, I'm using the ProTech shock pliers. I would say they're the best pliers on the market. They hold the shock, it doesn't slip, doesn't move. I'm going to put the O-ring inside my shock collar ring. This is what obviously holds the top of the spring. I'm going to treat the O-rings on our shocks, have a fairly tight O-ring. So what I want to do is treat them with this compound that what it does is keeps the silicone oil from getting into the O-ring and keeps it from swelling. Because our shocks are tight enough, I don't want that O-ring swelling any tighter than it already does. These new orange pieces, they're pretty much the same as the old ones. They're just orange in color. This makes everything easier to see. Then when I put on my retainer cap, I'll make sure I do not tighten it all the way to start. I'll just leave it loose. Then I'll take some oil and just put some drops of oil into the hole so that it can soak in, sink in, and makes the shaft go in a little bit easier. Then when I put my piston on, another thing I'll do is I'll make sure that I do not over tighten the piston. Because I found that if you over tighten that piston, you can actually squish it and make it fit too tight in the shock body. So when I tighten it, I'll barely tighten it. It'll just touch the piston. I'm not over tightening, I'm just snug. Now you can see it's tight, but it's not squished. One of the new features on our shocks is this new bladder. It's called the bellows bladder. I don't know if you can see it on there, but it's got little bellows that enables us to build our shock with zero rebound, but not having to drill a hole in the cap, not having to pressurize it a certain way. It just allows the shock, you'll see when I'm done, how it will have zero rebound throughout the stroke. Before I put the shaft in, I'll put a little oil on it. I want this to go through without doing any damage to the O-rings. So I'll just gently work it in, make sure it's smooth, and then I'll tighten up the bottom retainer to retain the shaft. It's an ultra smooth finish, ultra smooth shock without any problems. Fill up the shock with the oil that I want, using the piston I want. Same as every other shock. I'll pump it, and I give it probably 10-15 minutes to allow every bit of air to come out. Okay, the shock has been sitting now for about 5 or 10 minutes. All the air is out. I'm going to put the ball into the shock end, which again these ProTech pliers are perfect for. Just snap it in. I'll take a body reamer and I just take a little bit of the plastic out of the end of the shock end. That way when I thread it, it's a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shock now, take my bellows bladder, and I'm going to put it in the top of the shock with my bottom finger I'm going to push up the shock shaft as I hold the bladder down, wiggling it, getting all the oil and air into those crevices of the bladder. Then when I feel it, feel the top of the shock shaft just bump my finger, that's where I'm going to stop. The next cool feature of our shocks is this new cap. It's a high volume cap with a air bleeder and a screw to set it. So when I put this cap on now, I'll set the cap tight. I'll draw the shaft down about 1/4 of an inch to draw the bladder down a little bit. Then I'll put my set screw in. And this you can play with, the amount of air volume you have in there. You can adjust and play with to see whatever you like, but this is what Ty likes the best on his car. What this does is gives a dead shock throughout the stroke. When I screw this on now, you can see the pliers hold really well. I never screw the shock up all the way. On the front, I screw it to 35 millimeters of the car, and on the rear, I go to 44. And I'll just set it so that I have 35 millimeters, and it's a little bit unthreaded, but it's not a problem. We've never had a breakage or a pull out or anything like that. When I get it to 35, that's the shock length I'll leave it at. I'll do both sides exactly the same. And there's my shock complete with zero rebound, zero, it doesn't draw in, doesn't draw out. It just stays wherever the shock is. That's where it stays with that awesome bladder and the new cap. On the rear of the car, like I said, we use 44 millimeters in here. And on that's the rear of the truck is the same. And on the rear of the front of the truck, it's 48 millimeters. Or 38, sorry. 38 millimeters on the front of the truck, 35 on the front of the car, and 44 on the rear of the car. And that's it.